everyone. Have you played the latest game out there? Googleopoly. You're watching Techstrong Gang. Hi everyone, happy Monday. It's Alan Schimmel, and I am thrilled to be here on Techstrong Gang. I hope you are too. We've got some great gang members. We're going to be talking about the news of the day as we always do. Let me quickly introduce them to you. First, I think we're going to go to New Mexico. And yes, she has a new camera. And we could really see her here. And we're so happy. Thrilled to have.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad I'm no longer pixelated.
Yeah, well, no, you weren't pixelated. You were always a little foggy. Just a little foggy. It's like, I feel like I went from the TV where I had to sit and hold the antenna or put some aluminum foil on it to my first HD. So.
Well, I still feel foggy. It's early in the morning, but I'm so happy to be here, discussing topics that are going to be thrown at me that I got to dance to.
Okay. Tracy Ragan, CEO of Deploy Hub here on the gang. Moving from Tracy, we're going to move to a Techstrong editor. I think she's in Ohio, probably back home in Ohio. She is our Techstrong editor for Techstrong IT, Techstrong.ai, I believe. And she does so much more. Our own Sulagna Saha. Hi, Sulagna. How are you?
Hi, Alan. I'm good, thanks. Good to be out.
Very nice and red today, too. So thank you for joining us on this lovely Monday. I hope everyone had a nice Easter. Moving from Sulagna to Colorado, I don't see any red lipstick on him. But he is future MVP DevOps, getting ready to get out to RSA next week, our own Mitch Ashley. Hey, Mitchell, you're on mute, I think.
I am, because the dogs were barking, but they've settled down. So I wanted to say, I love Tracy Ragan so much. There is no camera made that can adequately capture the awesomeness that is Tracy. She's such an amazing, I really mean that. She's
here
such an
we
amazing
go. We
person.
are just, do you owe her money or something, Mitch? What's going on here? But yeah, no, we're all on the Tracy bandwagon today. That's how it is. All right. And then, in the center square on Hollywood Squares today, he's a Yankee fan. That's lefty, throws righty. Four-tool guy, our chief content officer, Mike Vizard.
And happy to be home and generally recovered from jet lag. So it's all good.
All good. Happy Monday. Well, guys, we're a week out from RSA conference, one of my favorite times of the year. Mitchell and I have been going to RSA together. Since 2002, maybe, Mitch?
Yeah, 2002. That's right.
It's been a couple of years. And there's been a lot of water and vodka and everything else under that bridge.
Many evenings in cabs and Ubers. And
yes, yeah.
Having fun.
But I'm looking forward to being out there with you again next week. Of course, we'll be kicking off our 10th annual DevSecOps event. If you're going to RSA Monday, which is kind of like Satellite Conference Day, 0 day in the Moscone Center. I think we're in Moscone. I always get confused between North and South. If you're at Moscone West, it's the one on this side. I think it's North.
South. Now, if West is to the left.
No, West is where Broadcast Alley is. Then you got North and South. So anyway, you can look it up. It's DevSecOps Connect. We're talking about AI, cyber, and app dev. Mitch will be doing a great panel there. I'll be hosting all day. So if you're at RSA, stop on up. Even if you just have an expo pass, gets you in on Monday to see our event. And we'll be on Broadcast Alley all week after that. So be sure to check that out. It's still not too late to register for RSA, by the way. And if you need an expo pass, hunt around the Techstrong or Security Boulevard LinkedIn pages. I think we've put up codes for free expo passes. If you can't find it, write me. I'll get you an expo pass. Or at least an expo pass code. You still have to register. Anyway, moving right along. Our first story today is actually a judge's decision that came out last week. I don't think it was unexpected. They've labeled Google a monopolist. That means does that mean they don't pass go and they go directly to jail? They don't get to $200? What does it mean? Mike, you want to take it?
I'm not entirely sure what it means myself, but I am like, well, it's 2025 and we finally figured this out. So congratulations, everybody. But I feel like, we've been abused for a long time, and I'm much more interested in what the potential remedies might be. Alan, you have any thoughts about how this should play out? I mean,
Yeah.
because
Well, I think there's, I don't want to get all lawyerly and nitpicking, but I think you got to understand what this particular ruling is versus other rulings, both in the EU and the US, have, regarding monopolist practices by Google. Quite frankly, usually Google is considered a monopoly for search, right? And AdWords and so forth on search, because they do control 90+% probably of the organic search market. And so they sort of get to set the market for things like AdWords and search and rankings and all of that. And they have been found guilty of monopolistic practices on that issue in the past. I think in the EU for sure. This monopoly board game was not around search. It's around their advertising monopoly. It's basically, they own DoubleClick, and then they set out what the rates are for you to get an ad in there. And so this one is around advertising. So subtle. Follow me here, right? It's nuanced. This isn't a search monopoly. This is an advertising monopoly. So that's two monopolies against them. It's like putting two hotels on Boardwalk. Oh my God.
I think it's about time it's been, if we call a spade to spade, right? I mean, as a small company, I can't even tell you how frustrating it's been over the course of my career as a CEO running small companies to try to compete for advertising because it's so expensive and there's no place else to do it. But I can tell you, I'm very happy to say that I don't even talk about, advertising anymore on Google. All we talk about is optimizing for AI. So while I'm glad that she's called this out, I don't know if it matters because I think that line of business will be falling off. I would rather use, something like a ChatGPT or even Gemini itself to get information and not have to look at the ads. And the ads come up based on your searches. So it is different.
No, but these ads that they're talking about here, Tracy, are not the ads on Google search. It's the business of what used to be called DoubleClick, which is now Google. I forgot what the official word title is for DoubleClick. Google advertising, Google banner ads. They run the banner ads market.
Right. Right, which is a market we could never play in. It was just like there was no competition to keep the price down.
People don't click on those anyway. But that being said, the repercussions of this could be severe because this combined with the search monopoly makes a pretty strong case of, do you got to Ma Bell this? Do you got to AT&T and cut it up into 9 different regionals, or in this case, cut Google up into different businesses? Does the search business somehow get decoupled from the advertising business, from the AdWord business? How would you even do that?
How would you support the search business without the advertising business?
Maybe search, I don't know.
How would you drive Gemini without all the data that you're using to drive it into?
How would you justify Google's stock price without having this monopoly? Right? But Tracy, you said something and it resonates to me because one of the things they teach you in law school is the principle of judicial economy. Don't make a law if you don't have to. Don't make a decision if you don't have to. Sometimes these things take care of themselves. And it may very well be that we sat on our hands so long on Google's stranglehold on certain markets that we finally have seen the worm turn and new technology come out that may allow us, that may take care of this by itself, as you say, right? If AI represents an opportunity where we're throwing all the cards back up in the air and seeing where they land, right? Maybe Google doesn't wind up with that stranglehold that they've had.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of us would rather watch TV without commercials, right?
But
Someone's
then
got to
who
pay.
pays? As the content officer, who's going to pay for the content that gets created on these things if there's no ads and it's all surfaced up through AI? How is that going to get monetized?
I don't think ads are going away anytime soon. I mean, we've all predicted or at least thought ads might be going away, but they're as ever present as before. And that's how a lot of mobile apps have been funded or paid for revenue. I think the question about, I looked up before we got on the Techstrong Gang today, and I didn't use Google to look this up. So the numbers I saw were like 82% of the digital ad revenue globally they're expected to have in 2025, and 94.6 or 0.8, something like that, of the search is happening through Google. So, if it's any closer in, it's 100%. I mean, you're almost there.
Well, right. Anything over 80-85% is
Yeah.
monopolistic.
But we don't live in the days of Standard Oil where things get broken up into separate companies and, torn apart. And at least that hasn't been the pattern for competitive behaviors, monopolist behaviors. More likely it'll be some tweak this thing here so you don't have quite the advantage there. Take that away from that browser there so you're not the default here. Pay a fine there. Usually those are the remedies that we get out of these legal actions, antitrust actions. So I'm not anticipating any great earth-shaking revelations to come out of this. I could be wrong, but that's not the history.
I'll say this. No matter what they do, the cow's already out of the barn and the damage has been done. I did I did 2 Shimmy Says segments last week on LinkedIn Live. The second one linked to an article that I wrote, and that article was also published in the newsletter of a Compros, which is an organization that seeks to bring together like PR agencies and media companies and stuff like this. And the problem is it's fundamentally changed my business anyway. Sounds like it's changed Tracy's business a bit. But in the media business, right, there was a golden age of digital internet media maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And that media, the big revenue stream was ads, banners and ads. Never for Techstrong, I might add, right? Because we serve a tech audience and banners are just never a big component of our rev mix. But for the media world, Google had a stranglehold on the traffic that you got from organic search. And they were, as you say, Mitch, serving up 80+% of the digital ads. And you've seen in the media world, not just tech media, but, all media, huge companies going under, big just all kinds of craziness and chaos going on because the bottom fell out of that market. Because instead of just relying on building a big audience like a TV model where you build a big audience, your Nielsen ratings are up and you charge more for advertisers, you couldn't, because you could charge more for advertisers. Google charged more for advertisers, but you didn't get it. And so the model has drastically changed, and media companies now have to say, maybe I want a smaller audience, but I know more about that audience. It's a more engaged audience. It's, I could better monetize that than just trying to be a mass marketer with Google banners running.
Nobody talks about this, but that model you described did massive amounts of harm to readers because media companies turned their content models upside down and they started chasing stories that had the highest ad rates associated with them. So they'd spend an inordinate amount of time on narrow topics that somebody was paying a premium ad for versus a mainstream topic. And it kind of just changed their entire content strategy in a lot of these organizations, and not in a way that was in the interest of the reader, to be frank.
Spoken like a true chief content officer there, Mr. Vizard. I don't disagree. I don't disagree. Sulagna, you're an editor. What do you think about that?
Yeah, obviously, as we have seen in the case that publishers have been affected by this monopolization of advertisement by Google. And yes, at the end of the day, it is the readers, it is the consumers that it comes down to heart. And not only does this kind of behavior kill competition, they also work unfavorably for businesses as well, and like the entire swath of entities. And I agree to some extent with Mitch that nothing big or revelatory is really going to come out of this antitrust case, really, because like we have seen this over and over. I'm sorry, Apple got sued too by the DOJ for its closed ecosystem that makes it difficult for customers to leave. Amazon, Meta, they have all been accused of monopolistic behavior. The FTC sued Amazon for monopolizing the marketplace, like squeezing sellers and not letting them sell their products on other websites for lesser price. And and there is the antitrust against Meta for creating a monopoly in social media, buying WhatsApp, Instagram, and what have you, crushing competition. So Google might be forced to sell some portions of its ad technology. I don't know, double click maybe. Um, uh, yeah, but and that probably will check some of its influence to a certain degree. But yeah, I don't see anything big happening from it because Google, it has all, I mean, it's a $1.86 trillion company and it's basically the face of big tech. And they've always influenced the way we use the internet, the way we browse, the way we shop online. So it would be quite difficult to completely cut that back, that kind of influence.
Mhm. You could argue, though, that Google has generated a lot of revenue that is ill gotten. And you could theoretically come up with a case that says, here's the level of fine that needs to be applied, and maybe people can make a claim for some level of damage on that fine, and we'll all get emails saying, we qualify for, a $25 payment from Google because, they're part of this massive settlement that somebody created. But theoretically, there is, I think, some sort of penalty that stings needs to be applied here to make not becoming a monopolist attractive in the future, right? Otherwise, we have all these crimes that people are committing, but if no one's actually getting penalized, then the next person will just do the same thing.
Unfortunately, for cases like that, so many companies, so many businesses, so many people are affected that a small fine does not make justice for the damage caused. So, yeah, obviously, cumulatively, it would be a big amount for probably for Google, but well, they have got money. We know that.
I would guess that Google's gonna appeal this, and it'll get pushed back for
Yeah.
some years
Hmm.
before anything ever happens, and they have an ar they I mean, they could certainly argue that there's TikTok out there, that TikTok's probably taken a good portion of their business because people have learned to do things in different ways, that we
Well,
every big
that
trend
right.
gets
That's
disrupted.
exactly my point on judicial economy, right? Where if you wait long enough, the situation will rectify itself, hopefully. Let me play devil's advocate just for a quick second. Would the internet be all it is had it not been for Google's dominance in search and ads?
Yes and no. I would say that search played a key role in that, but we could have had multiple search engines that
Well, we
people just
did, right? I'm old enough to remember Alta Vista and InfoSeek and Excite
right.
at Home, and of
But,
course
but
Yahoo.
but eventually Google cut deals with people and gave them a kickback on revenue that loaded Google in front of you, and it became like a dominant thing. And I think ultimately it wound up being a preference. And also, they had a better indexing engine that they
Yeah,
were
no, they
using.
had a better mousetrap, but it wound up being monopolistic, perhaps. But because of that, was the internet able to become better or more
I think
useful?
there's two sides to this coin, Alan. One is by being a dominant player, they put all the eyeballs in one place. Go into Google, that's where you're going to get the most search traffic. People looking at traffic. The downside is they control all that. They control the algorithms, they control the advertising, and they're constantly changing. I mean, how often do we talk about, oh, the algorithms change, something's different, our traffic is looking different. What do we do? And everybody gets out their magic 8 ball and their Rubik's cube and whatever Ouija board to figure out what the algorithm is doing now. And that's been harder and harder to do over time. And as generative AI has come on board and people are starting to use Perplexity and Gemini and other things in place of Google, is putting pressure because those are not ad driven, those services. So it's an interesting time, but I think choice and freedom of choice always wins the day. And as soon as someone is the dominant player and it's a far distance to the second, that's not healthy for our environment because now we're not getting the best products we can get.
I think their addiction to ad revenue is killing search, because if you go in on Google now and still use it, what comes up is 4 to 5 ad units before you actually get to the point of what you want. And ultimately, people are just walking away from that model because they're like, this thing isn't particularly useful. And then they'll run around and start saying, we need to change the algorithm to make it more useful. But the fundamental issue is the algorithm's being tweaked to drive the ad revenue, and the ad revenue is popping up results that nobody wants.
I'm just going to say one more thing and then we got to go to break. Thank goodness for Linux on the desktop that saved us from that Windows monopoly. You're watching Techstrong Gang.
Discover Techstrong Group, the epicenter of tech innovation. We're your go-to for reaching IT leaders and practitioners worldwide. Our secret? Impactful content that sparks awareness, engagement, and top-quality leads. With us, you'll access editorial websites, streaming videos, virtual events, custom content, analyst research, and more. Join our satisfied clients. Let's revolutionize your tech journey. Contact us today and tell your story to the world in the most powerful way with Techstrong Group.
Hey folks, we're back and we're going to have a little chat about what Microsoft is up to in the cloud native space. They were recently at KubeCon in Europe with us, and Mitch met with them and generated a report. And it's interesting to watch how Microsoft seems to be evolving in the open source space. Does the tiger have a different set of stripes, Mitch? What's going on?
Well, we don't talk about Microsoft and Kubernetes always in the same breath, right? We all know that they have AKS, Azure, Kubernetes services. But I think they get overlooked a lot of what they do contribute. Maybe they're not the number one contributor to Kubernetes, but they are very active in the community. And what I took note of, and I wrote the report on, we can put a link in the description or it's on the futurumgroup.com site, is that the areas that they were beefing up were all around AI workloads. So there's some things they added to AI workloads and also simplification, addressing the complexity problems with Kubernetes that we're all well aware of. AI workloads, they did things like adding support for VLLM, which is an open source standard for essentially giving you programmatic access to different models instead of kind of hardwiring models into your code or into the server. And so that gives you better access, but also some things that will drive better performance, higher performance with AI applications, kind of get into the weeds of what they are. But the other is they've made some improvements to some of the manageability, like doing some auto upgrades of clusters, making that easier. But one of the things they also contributed was a new open source project called Headlamp. And DevOps.com had an article about this at the time, when that was made. And headlamp is an attempt to say, let's kind of step back and put a new fresh skin on top of Kubernetes from a management standpoint. And then they contributed that back to the CNCF. It's a sandbox project. It's early. And, is it stunning in terms of what it does? No, but it's pretty simple. And it doesn't look like a Microsoft product. It looks like an open source tool. And there's been some good reception of it. I mean, not everybody's signing up and rushing on to be on the project quite yet, but it holds some promise. And I'm glad to see Microsoft now contributing back to Kubernetes and improving AKS, but also, trying to address the complexity issues around Kubernetes.
Tracy, we talked about Headlamp when we were out in London at KubeCon on this show, but it seems like a couple of things are coming together here. Kubernetes is kind of like the new OS, and then we're seeing Kubernetes used pretty much at the core of every AI project. And now it feels like Microsoft is trying to throw a graphical interface on top of that called Headlamp. So are we looking at the Windowization of Kubernetes with AI kind of driving that, or what's your take here?
I think that Kubernetes is pretty complex, especially if you have like literally hundreds of containers running out there, tons of namespaces, and you need something to make it more to simplify it. You have to have something that you can see what's happening. I don't think that we're going to have, this is a tool for Kubernetes admins, so it's a long time coming. Maybe it'll make chargebacks easier, right? If you can start having some visibility into where your costs are and where, the jobs that are running, what the daemon sets that you're trying to manage. I mean, there are so many things to understand when you're building out these large Kubernetes workloads that you have to have something that gives you visibility into what you have created. To me, this has been a long time coming. Why didn't they create this sooner? Why did it take so long to do this? Because when you have these kinds of complex tools, if you really want to push adoption, you have to simplify it. And I really do believe that we're at a point with Kubernetes that we're at a point where we really want to start pushing adoption. I work a lot with government, and they're talking about moving from HPC VMs to Kubernetes environments. They're looking at decoupling. And in those environments, you really have to have something to simplify it. So it's critical.
It's a big part of the platform for modernizing off of VMware. People are looking at, KVM and Kubernetes. And I've called Kubernetes the dominant workflow platform. I mean, it is everywhere. It's what runs my Office 365. Microsoft had to transition off their own technology in 2022, I think it was, to start using Kubernetes. And maybe this tool was born out of that in part. But your point's right on, Tracy. I mean, not dinging Microsoft, but why did it take Microsoft to come up with this open source project to do this? This could have been contributed. Maybe you and I, Tracy, should have done this 2 years back and built something, but more you than me. But, somebody did it. So let's see if we can help support it and see if it takes off and, get some people behind it and using it. I did have dinner with a very large healthcare insurance provider who actually was a healthcare provider who I can't tell you the numbers of, but it was like in the thousands of Kubernetes clusters that they manage. And one of the big challenges when you kind of get to a certain level of a really large installation of Kubernetes is not just operating it, but upgrading it, because Kubernetes is on a cycle of how often they come out with releases. And I think it's something like after the fourth one back is the last one they'll support. So it isn't supported in perpetuity. They want you to upgrade it. And when you have a really large installation, you can't upgrade your stuff 4 times a year or twice a year, or maybe once a year. And so anything that helps people do multi-cluster, multi-namespace upgrades, deploying patches and fixes, just the blocking and tackling at that scale is extremely difficult.
For the record, I think it was 2016 or 2017, I went to DockerCon down in Austin, Texas. And we were looking at launching what became Cloud Native now. It was originally, if you remember, well, Mike and Mitch, I'm sure you do, Container Journal, and we changed the name. But at the time, I was thinking of something with the word Docker in it. But, Docker had trademarks on everything. And So I went down to DockerCon and I did a lot of I was press. I did a lot of interviews, spoke to a lot of people, had a lot of barbecue. And I came back here to the media ops at the time, not even Techstrong office, and said, Docker's really hot. We can't use that name anyway. But everyone there is talking about some new thing coming out of Google that's going to be released soon. I think it was 0.8 was the release at that point. This thing called Kubernetes. But I looked at it and I'm telling you right now, it's so damn hard. It's never going to catch on. It is just really, really hard to use. I can't imagine who would want to use this. I'm still working. Because Tracy, Mitch, had we done a nice GUI for Kube back then, we'd probably be on some Caribbean island now or Greek island or something, right? Vacationing. I think it was well known, it was obvious that Kubernetes was too hard.
I think part of the reason that, so go ahead.
It's not just Kubernetes that's hard, it's what you create on top of Kubernetes, right? When you start blowing apart your monolith so you can take advantage of a decoupled architecture, your application becomes hard, becomes complex. Security around it becomes more complex. Deployments become more complex. Jenkins workflows become more complex. So it has a trickle down or a trickle up effect. So it's not just the operating system. It's not just the platform you're running in. It's everything that touches it.
I'm not saying that correlation is causation here, but the UK is looking hard at Microsoft for charging more for versions of Windows that run on other clouds than their own. And it may come down to a point that maybe the reason that they want to make Kubernetes a lot more graphically friendly, as it were, is because they know that at some point someone's going to come knocking and saying, hey, this thing you do where you charge people twice as much for running Windows on another cloud is perhaps illegal, but we'll see how that kind of plays out. But maybe they need an exit. And this is it.
Yet another reason for Linux on the desktop. We're going to take
This
a
is the
break on
year.
Techstrong
This is
Gang.
the
We'll
year.
be back.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
Hey, folks, we're back and we're talking about, application security one more time. But there's a report out from the folks at Reversing Labs that notes that, and we've talked about this on the show multiple times before, that commercial software is just as prone to have vulnerabilities as open source. And we see the open source community kind of gets hit on the chin a lot about this particular issue. But Tracy, let's start with you. I don't think anything in here surprised you, but should we not be maybe beating up on the open source community so much about this when it seems to be a problem that everybody has?
I'm a fan of open source, and I have been frustrated with how much open source has been blamed for vulnerabilities coming through the software supply chain. And while it's true they're there, we are starting to demand more accountability from the open source communities. And accountability and visibility, I think we still have some problems with exposing if an open source community is actually trying to comply to basic security practices like OpenSSF scorecard. But when it comes to commercial software that you're purchasing, you're bringing in and you're running, we don't have the habit, I'm saying collectively we, of asking for an SBOM, asking for a vulnerability report on a regular basis, or having any way of seeing what exposures might be coming through that commercial software. And that commercial software consumes open source packages. How old are those open source packages? Do they have ones that are that have current vulnerabilities that are malicious that they shouldn't have sent over to a customer? So this really is a discussion in my world about accountability, having easier ways to see what's being consumed by the software you purchase or the software you use for free. There really isn't a big difference in my mind because what you're saying is, I want to use this, I'm going to put it in my environment, whether you pay for it or you get it from a GitHub repo. It kind of doesn't matter in my world. What matters is that we're not doing a good job of managing this problem. We talk about shifting left, doing code scanning, but we seldom ever talk about what is hitting production today. How can we manage it? How can we react to it as quickly as possible? We always push this conversation over to the left, which is why open source communities get beat up about it. When commercial software, they should be pushing things to the left too. But what's operations doing? And how does operations or anybody accepting code from a commercial source, what are the standards we should practice to make sure and put accountability on that commercial company to make sure they're giving us code that we can trust? And if there's a problem, how do they report it? And I know companies like Microsoft, they have amazing procedures for reporting what is in their commercial software, but that doesn't mean everybody. And there's a lot of commercial software out there that has got lots of exposures. They're not they're not shifting left. They're not being pushed like the open source community is. So we have a long way to go. We have a very long way to go to solve this problem. And what we're doing now isn't enough.
I think the transparency is on two ends of the spectrum, right? Open source, it's very visible what the bugs are, what the vulnerabilities are. It's not hard to get a hold of it. And because some of them have been in parts of Linux or in code that's in widespread use, that catches our attention in the media side of things. Not the same is true necessarily. I mean, we do hear about, vulnerabilities of something that happened in Zoom or Microsoft product, whatever it might be. But we don't have, you can't go anywhere and say, well, tell me all the bugs that are in your software. Let me see which ones I'm really concerned about. And I just don't have the access to that, nor do I have the time to go look at all that stuff. So one, I think it's easier to kind of pick at and say, this is an issue when it's, to your point, Tracy, it's just as big an issue for all software, is making sure that we are addressing those vulnerabilities, and there's a whole disclosure, and not everybody discloses at the same level and the same rate. So I think I don't know if unfair is the word, but I think it's easy to jump on the bandwagon and say open source is the problem. It's not the problem. It's how we manage vulnerabilities.
The part that drives me crazy, the part that drives me crazy is the commercial people will wrap themselves in this thing that says, well, we're not open source, so we're clearly more secure. But half of the code that's in that commercial offering is borrowed from some open source code somewhere that some developer shoved in there.
Close to 80.
But it's a visibility problem. We don't have visibility into to what, if you bring something into your environment, you don't have visibility into what's happening in that code base. You have no visibility whatsoever. So we have to fix this problem. I don't want to call it observability. I've been talking about this forever. It's visibility into the packages that you're consuming mapped to where you're running it, so that when a new vulnerability does show up, you know that you're impacted in your environments, whether it be open source or commercial or homegrown.
So
we have to have the visibility.
I look at this report and this article on DevOps.com, and I say, oh my, the worm has turned again. When I first got into technology and security specifically, I think the prevailing thought was that open source was more secure than commercial software. After all, there were 1,000 eyes on the code, right? That was the prevailing argument. There's 1,000 eyes, and anyone can look at the code and test it for themselves. Of course, we found out that no one really looks at the code. There's two little guys in a garage that do the 90% of the code in there, and and then the worm turned, and all of a sudden, open source is insecure. Open source is insecure. Commercial source is more secure. Now we're saying, well, commercial source is just as vulnerable as open source. Well, Mike, you made the point. 80% of the code in commercial source software is open source anyway, or built on open source. The real answer is all software is insecure. That's it. Now, will SBOMs help us to better manage insecurities as we find them? I hope so. That's certainly the promise of SBOMs. And the thing about SBOMs is I've never read a thing that says SBOMs only for open source software. SBOMs for all your software. If you're going to mandate the use of SBOMs, it's for all software, not just open source or, or closed source. And that is, I think, that's something that could really help here. We had a report last Friday about what went on last week with the CVE database and then subsequently the National Vulnerability Database that NIST maintains. And, this whole issue of managing vulnerabilities is hot again, right? I thought when Mitchell and I worked at Still Secure, and Mitchell developed a product that we had called VAM, Vulnerability Access and Management. I thought we were making progress. I thought if you would have asked me in 2003 when we did that, would we be sitting here talking about this problem in 2025? I would have said, God, no. God, no. We would have figured it out by then. But we haven't. It's worse now than it was then.
I am optimistic on 2 points though. One is it's true that providers of commercial software are reluctant to give SBOMs because they don't want people to know exactly how their thing was configured. But some companies and corporations are now telling those people they are on a do not renew list, because if we don't have visibility into that software and we don't know what the vulnerabilities are, we're not.
So are we looking for them to voluntarily emigrate back to their native country?
I think if you're running software, you have a right to know what's in it because it impacts your entire operation. So
let me say something about SBOMs really quick. Okay, SBOMs are great, but they suck. Because
there's something about the meaning of life in that, Tracy. They're really great and they suck.
But they suck. Because if you don't consume the data, there's too much volume to it. It's not something a human can interpret or work with. It has to be consumed in order to be relevant. And we don't have that conversation enough. And I get frustrated because Deploy Hub, that's what we do. We consume SBOMs. We aggregate SBOMs. We expose SBOM package information. We map it to the production environments. But just like testing, security and testing always gets pushed to the side, especially when you're trying to keep up with AI or you're looking at a recession and you want to cut staff. So that's why, Alan, that's why we're still here.
Do you think we'll use AI at some point to make, to consume that SBOM data in a way that humans can wrap their head around it?
We are actually, well, we've already done quite a bit of work, and the Ortelius community is working on, model context protocols. After we learned about that last week, and then I reached out to our open source community, and they're like, yeah, we're already working on that with our data. So I believe that we are getting to a point with AI that we will make us smarter when it comes to reading the SBOM data and doing something with it. But that data still has to be aggregated across multiple containers so that an application an application security profile can be seen and the vulnerabilities at the application level can be dealt with. It has to get aggregated up, and then it has to be exploited across all the applications that use that particular container that may have that particular vulnerability. Kubernetes has made this more complex. So now we need the tools to be able to read the data, aggregate it, but everybody start generating an SBOM, even though it's just a check mark now.
Agreed. I think it's, we've been talking about SBOMs now for 2 or 3 years. It's time. It's time for that. Anyway, it's also time to end our show today. I hope you've all enjoyed this Monday morning edition of Techstrong Gang. We have, as usual, full day of, or a few couple hours more of Techstrong TV for you to watch. So check that out. Some great content. A reminder again, next Monday, we will be out in San Francisco at RSA. And I think, Mitch, you and I, or whoever else we can grab out there, will probably be doing some gangs from RSA. We'll be broadcasting live from Broadcast Alley all week, so please do check that out. We have a lot of other activities going on. If you want to meet up with us at RSA, you could reach out to us on social media or email. And, our dance cards are full. I'll be doing a lot of video interviews, but there might be some time, always time, to catch up with friends from the security world. Anyway, until then, or until tomorrow, this is Alan Schimmel for Techstrong Gang. Have a great day, everyone. We're out.